afternoon. Welcome to Harris Hall and welcome to the afternoon edition of the June 21st, 2022 Board of County Commissioners meeting. Good morning. Good afternoon. And Mr. Mokrycki, we have a full schedule this afternoon, a lot of items, and we're going to begin with item 10A in Public Works, which is Order 22-0621-13, in the matter of approving a contract with HDR Engineering Incorporated in the amount of $201,444 to complete a wastewater feasibility study for the unincorporated community of Blue River, and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the contract. And Mr. Mokrycki, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your panel and begin the agenda item.
Thank you, Chair. Dan Hurley, our Director of Public Works, is here to lead this item. Dan.
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Yes, we wanted to bring this to your attention. It's sort of a standard contract award, but it's significant because this is hopefully the first in several milestones in achieving a community wastewater system for Blue River. You're probably aware this has been a long sought after project pre-fire. And post-fire, there's a real opportunity here to get a community wastewater system, as well as to upgrade their existing water distribution system. We were lucky to get a $15.5 million allocation from the legislature through ARPA funds, and $13.3 million of that is for water and wastewater in Blue River. So we're moving through a process to hopefully deliver on that. And the first step is getting a consulting team on board to help us do a feasibility study. There was a feasibility study that was done several years ago, but that needs to be updated and looked into more detail of where drain fields could be located, for example. So we're hoping to hire a consulting firm from HDR Engineers Incorporated, a very solid team. We're looking forward to working with them. We're also bringing on a staff person that will start next week, Rob Woodard, who will be the project manager for this and other wastewater special districts projects that come up. I think that's it, unless you have other questions.
Thank you, Director Hurley. I'll turn it over to the board for potential questions. And just a reminder to everyone that today the order before us to approve a contract. No further action than approving the contract and allowing Mr. Mokrycki to sign the contract, which is prepared and or close to prepared and ready to sign. So with that, I'll turn it over to the board for questions. Commissioner Buck, thank you.
Just a comment. This particular item is pretty exciting because it has taken us a while to try to receive the $15.5 million in allocations for water system improvements up in Blue River. That was actually something I testified to, and we were approved for that well over a year ago. And I'm excited to finally see that we are starting to get some of that money flowing. We know that that feasibility study was fairly old at the time, and we do need to update it with all the changes that have occurred. And I'm excited to hear that you have somebody hired. I know that was a challenging position to fill, but I know that the community is underway trying to get through this process as soon as possible. And I'm just hoping that we can get the rest of the funding as soon as possible as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. You've been very close to this since the inset, all of those stats.
Reset.
Reset at this point. With that, I don't see any further questions, Director Hurley, so I'll ask for the motion. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I'll move approval of Order 22-06-21-13 as presented.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Vice Chair Trieger. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Burney.
Congratulations, Dan. I see this as pretty pro forma, but forgive me, I'm just sort of tongue in cheek. So you've hired someone, but what if we don't approve this? What are they going to manage? I'm just kidding. I'm good. I'm ready to vote.
By the time it comes to us, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed for the most part. And I'd like to remind before we take the vote that Commissioner Bozievich is excused absent today. Any further discussion to the motion? I see none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich present. Thank you, Director Hurley. Don't go too far. Ms. Mokrycki, next item is a staff report, Lane County Parks funding recommendations. And I'll turn it over to you once again to please introduce your panel.
Thank you, Chair. Brett Henry, our Parks Manager, is here to lead this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Mr. Henry, good to see you.
Nice to see you as well, Chair, and other two commissioners. Thank you very much.
Three.
You're lucky you're right.
Three commissioners.
Three.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so for the record, my name is Brett Henry. I'm the Parks Division Manager here at Lane County, and with me is Mr. Dave Metz. You can see him virtually there. And we're here to present a funding plan for Lane County Parks. Dave will be talking about the results that we got from a recent public polling survey. And, I'll follow Dave by talking about the findings we've received.
Recording in
for additional
progress.
funding for local parks. I'm just going to get my screen shared here. If you give me just one moment. There we are. So I'm going to walk through the highlights of the survey findings, which overall I think are very encouraging, as were the results of the baseline survey that you may remember we shared with you roughly 1 year ago, and then be happy to answer any questions you may have after you've seen my presentation and Brett's. To start with, just a little bit about the methodology of the survey. We conducted our interviews at the end of May and spoke with just over 540 voters throughout Lane County who are considered likely to cast ballots in this November's election. This was a multimodal survey that was done through a mix of phone calls to both landline and wireless phones, as well as an online survey to which participants were invited to join through emailed and text message invitations. Same methodology we used for last year's survey, and it's sort of the standard practice for surveys of this type within our industry right now, given the different ways that the public is choosing to communicate. Phone surveys alone no longer really reach a broad audience, and so having a mix of phone and online interviews is helpful. Key findings that come out of the survey. First and most fundamentally, what we see is that if the voting public is aware of the needs of the park system and the benefits that would come from additional investment, we see strong support for a local option levy of 16 cents per $100,000 of assessed value. Voters, in fact, are willing to pay up to as much as $30 per year in order to support improvements to local parks. This support comes from the fact that voters recognize that there is a need for additional funding for the Parks Division. About 3 in 5 voters tell us that they perceive at least some need for such funding, and that lines up pretty directly with the proportion who say they would vote yes on a potential levy ballot measure. The more voters learn about the need for such a measure and the ways that those investments might be deployed, the more supportive they become, and their level of support remains high even after voters hear some critical statements from potential opponents that might object to such a levy. These findings are particularly encouraging given the overall public mood that we're seeing right now. In Lane County, as in much of Oregon and frankly much of the country, voters are becoming more and more pessimistic about what they see as the direction of their community. In Lane County in particular, that's reflected in high levels of concern about homelessness, about the cost of living, which was a concern even a couple of years ago, but now driven by inflation is an even broader concern. At the same time, voters make regular use of Lane County parks. They have very positive views of the park system and approve of the performance of the Parks Division and how it's managed. And so they are willing to support additional investments in something they see as being critical to their quality of life, even as they do have these concerns about other challenges that may be facing the county. Some of their highest priorities for investment include protecting water quality, maintaining existing park facilities, protecting wildlife habitat, and restoring parks that have been damaged by wildfires. And many of the messages that are most effective in making the case for a levy are ones that focus on the importance of those kinds of investments, as well as the critical role that local parks play in providing an affordable location for outdoor recreation at a time when the cost of living is a pressing concern for many local families. The things that are their primary concerns and reasons they might vote no tend to focus on the cost of living and then distrust about whether government will spend the money effectively. But as we note, even after an exchange of pro and con arguments, we see continued strong support for a levy. So the bottom line coming out of the survey is we think a measure is viable for November of this year. So with that overview, some of the specific numbers that lie behind it, starting with some of the broader context for public opinion in Lane County. We asked our respondents to tell us whether they think things in the county are headed in the right direction or pretty seriously on the wrong track. This is a standard opening question for most of the surveys that we do for state and local governments. And as you'll see, the mood of the county has deteriorated significantly since our prior survey in March of last year. At that time, a 47% plurality of voters thought the county was headed in the right direction, 31% on the wrong track. Those numbers have basically flipped over the course of the past year. We now have a 47% plurality who sees things as being on the wrong track. Again, not unique to Lane County. We see the same dynamics, frankly, even more acute in the Portland region and also statewide in Oregon. The issues that are contributing to their concerns are probably not very surprising to all of you. We asked people to rate the list of issues you'll see on the left-hand side of the slide as either extremely, very, somewhat, or not serious problems in Lane County. The dark orange bars are the proportion that rate each as an extremely serious problem. We've totaled up the extremely and very, the top two categories, running down the right-hand side. And you'll see homelessness, cost of housing, inflation, gas prices, all at the top of the list. 3 of the top 4 concerns having to do with the cost of living, which is a dominant concern right now. Also significant concern about public safety, with nearly 2/3 of local residents rating it as a very serious problem. When it comes to issues that relate to parks and some of the challenges that a healthy park system is designed to address, there are large numbers of voters who view them as being at least a somewhat serious problem, but not quite the same level of urgency attached to them. But it's also worth noting that there's not an enormous amount of concern about local taxes. Only roughly 1 in 3 voters view the amount they pay in local taxes as a very serious problem. At the same time, we see broad approval for the performance of the Parks Division. In our survey in March of last year, 76% said they approved of the division's performance. That number is down slightly in this year's survey to 71%, but that's right around the survey's margin of error. And obviously still overwhelmingly positive sentiments about the work that the division is doing. So all of that provides context for the views that residents have about a potential funding measure. We asked the respondents, as we did in last year's survey, whether they saw a need for additional funding for parks and recreation facilities and programs in Lane County. In last year's survey, 70% said they saw at least some need. That number is down to 62% this year. And again, when we have this set of other issues that voters see as being more pressing challenges right now, it's not surprising that that number is a little bit lower, but it is still more than 3 in 5 voters who say yes, parks and recreation could use additional investment. And the test of voters' willingness to make that investment is their willingness to support a potential levy. We offered the respondents a model of the wording of a ballot question that could be used to establish a 5-year operating levy at 16 cents per $100,000 of assessed value, and found that 61% of respondents indicated they would vote yes, 35% indicated they would vote no. That number is statistically identical to what we saw in March of 2021, When using a slightly different question wording, we tested the same concept and found 59% indicating that they would be willing to support such a tax proposal to fund parks. Obviously, that's a strong starting point. If you have a measure that needs majority approval, including both the overall yes vote and the ratio between yes and no votes. It's worth noting a couple of the demographic distinctions that we see in support for a potential levy. The biggest one is partisan, as it is with any tax proposal typically. 3/4 of Lane County Democrats indicate they would vote yes. Independents are about evenly divided. Republicans are opposed, but even among Republicans, we have about 2 in 5 who indicate that they would favor it. Support is also correlated with educational attainment, with voters with college degrees more likely to indicate they would vote yes than those without. And there are also notable differences by gender and age. 71% of women indicate that they would support a levy compared to 50% of men. That's not an uncommon it's not uncommon to have that kind of gender division in support for a measure of this type, although the size of that division is larger than is often the case. And it is also the youngest segment of the electorate that is the most supported. 77% of voters under the age of 40 indicate they would vote yes, more modest majorities among older segments of the electorate. And then finally, looking at it geographically, the strongest support comes in the city of Eugene, where we have 70% in favor. Springfield, the number is 58%. The balance of the county is 51%. Now, we also asked our respondents to tell us a little bit about their thinking about why they would vote yes or no. For yes voters, when we ask them for their reasons for supporting it, you'll see the things that they mention most often. A recognition that there's a need for additional funding to take care of the park system, a belief that parks are essential to the quality of life and that environmental protection is important. And you'll see here just some examples of the kinds of things that respondents told us in their own words were the reasons that they would vote yes. And most of it just has to do with people's appreciation of the natural beauty of Lane County, the belief that a park system is important to maintaining that quality of life, and a recognition that it will take investment to ensure that the parks are well cared for. For opponents, there are 2 big concerns which really leap off the page as the reasons that they would vote no: concern about there being too many taxes, and then distrust of government to spend the money appropriately. And you'll see some examples here of the kinds of things that opponents said were the reasons that they would vote no. Some people questioning whether parks are allocating their money effectively. Some people saying, why should we be paying user fees at the same time that we'd also be expected to pay taxes? And then some concern about the intersection of homelessness in parks. You saw that homelessness, the #1 biggest concern for local voters, and wanting to see that addressed within the park system is one of the concerns that they raise. So in terms of the structure of a measure, we offered the respondents a list of ways that money raised by a levy could be used, had them rate each as either extremely, very, somewhat, or not important. The numbers running down the right-hand side are the total that rated each potential investment as either extremely or very important. And a few things really stand out at the top of the list for the breadth and intensity of priority that voters assign to them, particularly water quality. That is the clear #1 most urgent investment they identify, whether it's just protecting water quality in surface water or whether it's protecting the forests that help to preserve that water quality. The opportunity to capitalize on matching funds is also important to voters at a time when they're concerned about the cost of living. If we can make a local investment and leverage funds from outside the community, voters are enthusiastic about that. On this slide, you'll see the second tier of priorities for voters. I would note that virtually all of them are ones that, if we include those light blue bars that are the somewhat important, almost all of them we have a majority rating them as at least somewhat important uses of money. The one at the bottom of the list that stood out as being a lower priority is a regional pickleball facility. There clearly is a group of very passionate pickleball supporters that are evident in the data, but a larger number that perhaps just aren't as familiar with the sport and therefore are rating it as a lower priority. In general, facilities for active recreation rated as lower priorities here, or for sports, And that's the case in most communities where we do this type of polling. Aside from where the money will go, there were also questions about what voters would be willing to pay. We asked the respondents if they'd be willing to pay a variety of different amounts in additional taxes in order to support county parks. And you'll see here we had more than 3 in 5 voters indicating that they would be supportive of amounts up to $40 per year. When we get to amounts of $50 and $60 per year, we still have solid majorities that are in favor, but the proportion who say they would be very willing to pay each of those amounts is a bit lower when we're looking at $50 or $60 per year. Still, I think an impressive indication of the fact that even when voters understand that this could affect their own pocketbooks, they're willing to be supportive. Finally, we also tested a range of messages, things that supporters and opponents might say, and then retested support for the levy to see how it might hold up in the context of a community debate about it. We started at 61%, as you'll see at the top of this slide. After positive messages, that support moved up to 66, including 40% who said they would definitely vote yes. And even after opposition messaging, it remained at 61% overall support, with that definite support still higher than its initial amount at 38%. So encouraging numbers in that it suggests that support is not just broad, but also relatively durable for the potential levy. Here are the messages that we tested as reasons to vote yes. Some of the strongest arguments in favor of the measure talk about the importance of having affordable opportunities for local residents to recreate at a time when many other alternatives are becoming more expensive. The notion that it is cheaper to make investments in improving parks today than it will be if they're deferred for a longer period of time. And noting that there is a backlog because of past deferral of some of these maintenance priorities, as well as arguments about the benefits for future generations of having a robust and healthy park system and for public health as well, giving people not just an opportunity to improve their physical health, but also the mental health benefits that come from spending time outdoors. You'll see a second tier of messages here. These were all sort of in the 20s or low 30s in terms of the proportion who rate them as very convincing. Not a real negative reaction to any of them, but just less potent positive arguments in general. And you'll see that highlighted on this slide, where we take not just the proportion who rated each message as very convincing in the dark blue, but also the somewhat convincing in the light blue, in each case at least 3 in 5 having a positive reaction. So as I say, I think the survey documents that while the environment overall is a little bit more challenging than last year, given evident concern about the cost of living, we are still in a position where voters recognize the benefits that the park system provides to the county, are enthusiastic about making an investment to preserve those benefits, and are willing to vote yes on a levy, and again, with full consciousness that they'll be paying more out of their own pockets in order to preserve a park system that they clearly feel a great deal of affection for. So with that, I will hand it back to Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Metz.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Screen here. See where I can share. Yeah, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Yeah, so Dave gave you the results of the second survey. We actually had the first survey that was conducted about a year ago, March of last year. So last October, the Parks Division presented the preferred funding plan that was recommended by the Parks Funding Task Force. And this funding plan primarily consists of a 5-year local option levy. In the months since then, the Parks Division has completed a number of action items that were identified in the work plan. We had the this past February, actually, we had a meeting with the county commissioners. We talked about the work plan and some of the action items that were coming up. So 3 of these action items, the public polling, the deferred maintenance prioritization, and the community engagement has allowed us to further refine the funding plan. And so this refined funding plan then still contains the same funding categories and the same amount of the overall levy. There were just minor adjustments made to the allocations within each funding category, and I'll go over that later. So at today's meeting and prior to the scheduled board meeting we have on July 19th, the Parks Division is requesting feedback from the county commissioners on the funding plan that has been revised. So an activity we recently accomplished was prioritizing our deferred maintenance. As you can remember, we've given a couple of reports, facility condition assessments that show that there's about $22 million of immediate capital projects, and these are within the parks that have the most infrastructure. Since then, the Parks Division has prioritized those capital expenditures and recommended that were recommended by the 2 assessments, along with looking at the boating facilities that we have that we manage within the county. We actually operate and manage 33 facilities. So the prioritization was based on 4 criteria. Number 1, urgency, and that was identified by Faithful and Gould, the engineering firm that conducted the assessments. The second criteria we looked at were how often the assets were used. We looked at the condition of the assets. And lastly, the ability to complete the projects within a 5-year time frame. So we looked at each one and said, can we actually finish that within the span of the levy? So it's notable that all the high and medium priority projects made the cut. So I think that says something hopefully about our scoring system. And once all these projects are complete, we anticipate reducing the deferred maintenance backlog by about $15 million. That's within a span of 5 years. So this next slide kind of shows you how the deferred maintenance projects are distributed among different categories. And so you can see 3 really stand out. That's the paving and curbs, site utilities, and the waterway access. And so we're looking to leverage some funding. So with the waterway access, there's the potential to apply for Marine Board grants where we can just provide a 25% match towards those. And we also have some existing American Recovery Plan Act funding that was allocated recently to parks that we can use towards the site utilities. But also you can see that quite a bit is going to be dedicated towards our public restrooms. And in fact, a total of 25 restrooms are slated for either improvement or complete replacement through the levy. So this past month, we had 4 community engagement meetings. And so those are regional meetings held throughout the county. We had very good participation. We had over 120 comments and feedback that we got. And again, we're going to incorporate all that feedback into the levy and into the special projects category. But also, we received some feedback about our infrastructure. So that will go into the levy portion. So the 4 regions were Eugene and Springfield metro area, and we had the meeting here in Eugene. We had the West Lane County meeting over in Florence, and the East Lane County meeting over in Leesburg, and the South Lane County meeting was over in Cottage Grove. So it was really helpful to hear from the community how we're doing, what needs to be improved, and what we really need to focus on with this particular levy. And so we first started with giving a presentation about our master plan, but we also wanted to give them an overview of our budget and talked a bit about the funding task force and the role that they played in the recommendation. So there were 3 questions that were asked for their consideration. What enhancements would improve accessibility? Which recreational features are most desirable? And what educational elements will enhance the visitor experience? So what we heard was accessibility is very important and is an issue at a lot of our parks. The majority of our parks were constructed in the 60s and 70s, so there is a lack of accessibility that's certainly recognized. And, you know, they want more accessibility, not only to typical things like restrooms, but river access. Non-motorized river access was a big one. Wheelchair accessible ways that you can get to the beach or to nature trails. That was recommended to us over at the Florence meeting. And fishing platforms and wildlife viewing platforms that are readily accessible. That's something that's also needed. And something I heard time and time again was play structures that could be available for kids of all abilities. And that's something that is lacking in the area, and we could definitely fulfill that demand. So some of the recreation suggestions we got, an interconnected trail system, both terrestrial and aquatic. And so, you know, something that was really brought up and I heard time and time again, actually at all the meetings, was a water trail or a river blueway trail. So we also heard a lot about camping, both primitive and RV camping, how there's not enough areas that are close by to do that sort of camping. And more off-leash dog areas are needed. Those are enclosed, but also those areas along trails. And I guess we can debate later if it's an off-leash area is good to be on trails, but we'll have that debate today. Also, festivals and events were recommended as a way to bring in more tourism, and also, you know, a way to kind of generate some additional revenue. Stewarding the park, both to enhance, you know, wildlife viewing and birding. Birding, I heard time and time again. So evidently, a lot of folks. That's a real popular activity here, and we want to make sure that we provide the best habitat in our parks to allow the most number of bird species, but also establishing partnerships. And this was, you know, a way that we can leverage and we can work together with other agencies and organizations. One thing is, you know, with sports facilities, but just ways that we can, again, just improve the overall recreation potential here within the county. So looking at the education suggestions I was getting, we don't do enough interpretation, you know, recognizing the land history of Native peoples and also those folks that have donated property to the county. And again, that's about signage, but that's also about recognition. Birding information, again, we're hearing about folks who like to bird here at our parks, and providing that information, whether it be brochures or interpretive signage about some of the birds you can see at our parks, is certainly needed. Partnering with other agencies and organizations for an outdoor school. And this is something we could do, for instance, over at the Blue River Park that we have over close to Cottage Grove. Also partnering with programs that engage local area youth is something that's very needed. You see that over at Howard Buford Park. But we can help those organizations like the Arboretum, but we could also potentially do some of that ourselves. So that's a possibility. Looking at conservation type projects, we have one electric vehicle charging station now currently over at Howard Buford Park, but adding more of those charging stations are certainly needed. And we can see that now with the high gas prices. Invasive species removal and planting natives is something that I heard time and time again. So having a dedicated program towards that is something that's really needed. Also looking at some of the bank erosion that you see in our parks that are close to waterways. We need to do a better job of preventing some of that erosion. Some additional feedback that I received was, folks really want us to maintain the facilities we currently have. And, they know that, these facilities are deteriorating, but through the levy, we definitely have the potential to reinvigorate a lot of it. Overall safety and cleanliness, the kind of things that just really need more attention. And again, just kind of bringing things back to life is what we're hearing time and time again. There was a lot of support for the levy, for the deferred maintenance portion of it, as well as some of the safety things we can do with this particular funding package. So looking at the special and revenue generating projects, so it should be noted that they are not going to be subsidized through the levy, but through the about $1 million that we get each year through the hotel and car rental tax. And, I think we got a great potential to really look at our accessibility in county parks, do a study and see just, where our parks measure up. Revenue generation, again, if we can generate a little bit more revenue through some of these projects, I think that's certainly a positive. And also, again, the theme of working with other agencies and other organizations and cooperative projects just to improve the overall recreation within the county. So looking at the proposed funding plan, we're suggesting a 16 cents per 1,000 assessed value. And that lines up real closely with the public polling that Dave shared with you just a bit ago. And that would mean the average assessed value, it would cost about $36 a year, perhaps a little bit lower now that we've seen that housing prices have gone up. That would equate to about $3 a month. We're in that neighborhood. It should be noted that, even though this is called a $6 million levy, it often gets confused. This is over a 5-year time span. So it would bring in about $30 million to county parks. Again, the special and revenue generating projects are not part of the levy, but part of existing funding that is coming towards our parks. The categories: deferred maintenance, resources for routine and preventative maintenance, stewardship, and educational programming. So those are the categories that are still remaining the same from when they were proposed by the Parks Funding Task Force. This next chart here shows just how much is dedicated towards maintenance. It's really the lion's share. It's about 83%, both routine and regular maintenance, but also deferred maintenance. So that's something we certainly need to focus on with this levy. Also, though, a sizable chunk of this will go towards these non-levy projects, the special projects, as well as our stewardship and educational program. So the next steps are, we want to hear from you guys, the commissioners, on how you feel about our funding plan. There's a great opportunity, today and ahead of the next meeting that we have scheduled on the 19th. And on the 19th of July, we are going before the board to formally ask you to put the levy measure on the November ballot this year. So certainly want to hear your thoughts so we can incorporate that back into the overall funding plan. And we just we're certainly excited about kind of where we are right now with this process, and want to hear from you. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. And Dave's here as well to answer some questions you may have about the public polling survey, as well as questions you have about the funding.
Well, thank you, Ms. Henry, and thank you, Mr. Metz. I'll open it for board discussion. And just a reminder, the staff is recommending alternative A on Part B of the
That is
request.
correct. Yeah, that was the preferred alternative that was recommended.
And that is what you call a traditional funding strategy of $6 million generated annually for 5 years for a total of 30 million, as you just pointed out. Very good. So our questions will be surrounding the survey, surrounding the methods of funding, et cetera. So I'll turn it over to the board for questions. And I'll look for a cue. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just start by, I'm not sure, Ed, if you're sharing screen, but if you take it down, then we can more easily see Commissioner Burney in case he wants to weigh in. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I'll also just, and thank you, Mr. Metz, for the survey data. It's really important to us on this item, but it's also just generally important and interesting. It's a great opportunity to just get a sort of temperature read on sentiment in the public overall about the county and sort of where folks are. I'm sure we'll have a lot more conversation at our July 19th meeting, more specific and more detailed. But at this time, I'll just say generally, I'm really excited about this. I'm looking forward to, should this move forward and be on the ballot this fall, helping support that effort. I think I remember seeing in the polling, there was a question posed forecasting the renewal of the public safety levy next year and whether these would be seen as in conflict, and they were not. And that was really important to me to see that. Yep. And I think at this time, really, the main thing I would say is that, like with so many things, we feel like we're making this decision about something that's happening now, but this is really a decision that in some ways could seal the fate for parks moving forward. And a lot of the decisions that we make, we really have to try to zoom out and forecast much longer into the future. Not only because the 5-year levy, but what I see up there is a lot of interest in and need for more youth engagement and education. And the interpretive exhibits do that. And I know last year, I think it was, maybe it was earlier this year, we had our last presentation from the McKenzie Discovery Center. We talked a lot about the importance of youth environmental education, because really they're the future stewards of these resources. And I feel we have a real responsibility to the youth today, who are the future county commissioners and park users and taxpayers, to do right by them. So the more we can do on that side of youth education, interpretive exhibits, and so on, to help really get families with youth today engaged and invested in every way in our park system and enjoying using them in appropriate ways, the better for the future of our park system. So I really appreciate seeing that particularly called out.
Sure, appreciate
you.
that, Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trigger and Commissioner Buck.
I appreciate the information too. The polling was very interesting. I would love to be able to get a copy of the slides that he presented. They were different than what was attached to the material on our agenda today. And I would love to compare and look at it. It's very differently, it's the same information, but in a different viewing format that was easier for me to read. So I would, and I'm guessing a lot of other people as well, as they consider whether they want to support this or not. I was also very interested in the comparison to the public safety levy. That is really my only hesitation, is ensuring that if we put this forward, we will also be able to get that levy passed in May as well. I feel like both of them are very critical to the county, right? We know we have this huge budget deficit for the parks and this huge budget deficit for public safety. And they're both our responsibilities as the county, and we have to certainly work on one thing at the same time as multiple other major issues. So that particular polling data was good to see. Normally when I see data for polling like this that's been presented, it's easier for people to say yes on a telephone call or on an online survey that they will support something. But when it comes to actually filling in the bubble on their ballot, it usually drops a bit. And so the cushion, you got 11% cushion basically from the information provided is good to know, although I'd really like to see a good majority of people support it. But I always take that with a grain of salt, knowing that when it comes down to it at voting time, knowing that we have 35% of people that vote that we talked about earlier, that we still keep that cushion. Should we put it on a November ballot, things between now and then could change. We just don't know, right? The things that I could see that could help support this is maybe if we see by then any drop in inflation or drop in gas prices. We don't know, right? And that's out of our control. Primarily, that's federal policy that we can't personally implement here, and we won't know. So I'll be watching all of those things as you come forward next month as well.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Buck. And I think it's important that we have a solid message that we can present to potential voters and take a good look at the demographic data and some of those polling results and focus our message appropriately. We are going to be hiring a messaging consultant here pretty soon that will be looking at our messaging, but also, our branding and those kind of things, so we can make sure that we have a correct message. I do think that we're coming in pretty at a pretty sweet spot at 16 cents per 1,000 assessed value with solid support. But knowing that there is that cushion that you mentioned, we can't let our guard down, and we definitely need to work hard all the way through November, get that message out.
Follow-up question. Usually when we put things on the ballot, then usually a PAC will have to take over. We can't do that here as a governmental entity. What plans do you have in place for that work?
Well, I met with our legal counsel to see kind of where those guardrails are, so I don't go across those. I can promote information about the levy. I can't tell people to vote for it. However, there will be a political action committee that is formed. It's not formed yet. So I can't have a lot of involvement with that though. But I know kind of where the parameters are. So yeah, I mean, that will be an important part of it, raising some funds that need to go towards, the campaign, so to speak, as well as, some things that the political action committee can do that I can't do. So, yeah, that's going to be a part of this for sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. And, you stepped into caution a little bit there. The less we talk about PACs here, the better off we are. We can talk about it privately and in private, and those of us who support the levy will do what we can outside of this room. But that being said, I'll continue a little bit. Commissioner Berney.
Thank you, Chair. Brett, it feels like this has been a long time coming.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't know it was going to be so much work when I started.
Yeah, I didn't know it would take so damn long. I have a few questions, but I need to ask them in the context that that as Vice Chair Trieger, I'm going to support allowing residents to decide whether they want to tax themselves. I almost think it would be ridiculous not to do that. From kind of the higher level to a lower level. Mr. Metzen, this is absolutely not personal or anything, but is yours the FM3 that I once worked with in Los Angeles? Are you based in LA or Oakland?
I'm based in Oakland. Yeah, we have an office in Los Angeles. Okay,
I just want a general statement of principle. I want to remind our board and our staff that the whole idea of a community benefits agreement, and whenever things are able to be, hiring local and finding local talent to do ancillary kinds of tasks like this, I think, one, it recycles more dollars locally, and two, it helps build local talent. So nothing about FM3, but I just need to make that as a general statement. I have noticed that in all the subcontracts to get us to this point, it feels like they're all going outside of Oregon. And I hate to see that. Number two, how many, what kind of dollars were involved in these polling contracts?
Yeah, I can answer that. Well, first of all, Faithful and Gould, they have offices over in Beaverton, so we used those folks.
So corrected.
That's okay. Yeah, so we have not actually used Fund 217, which is our parks fund for this. So this these were all requests that we have given to the county administration to help us with funding this. So that's where the money has come from for these particular contracts.
Right. Not to belabor a point, but one day I'd like to know the amount. Mr. Metz, you might not be familiar with this, but my city of Springfield has its own park system. It's extraordinarily well funded and supported in the community of Springfield. It's called Willamette Lane. I didn't see any factoring of that when you discussed it, but when I go out and I will support this if it reaches the ballot, that's an obstacle which is real and which will have to in fact be messaged properly. I would like to know, you talked about 77% of voters, 36% of voters. How many people were actually in this survey?
It was just over 540. I think it was 543.
Okay. So it's of those surveyed, right?
Correct. That's right.
And I doubt you did this. I wouldn't have thought to. But did you ask this group of 540 some whether they voted in the last election, whether they were actually regular voters?
We can do better than that. If you ask voters if they voted, they will tell you yes, even if that may not be fully true. But in selecting the pool of voters to interview, we looked at their actual records on the voter registration files to make sure that they had a regular history of voting. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And then my only last comment, again, I'm saying this as someone that's going to support moving this forward. And Brett, I have no substantive comments on how you're structuring it. I think it's very well informed. There is in Springfield under a group called the ARC of Lane County, something called the ARC Park. That might be a wonderful partnership group, Brett, to look into, because they in fact are developing a playground on a multi-acre site for all children, especially and including special needs children. And I've always felt that might be an interesting partnership for Lane County Parks if we could move this forward. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a very good suggestion, Commissioner Burney. And actually, I'm aware of that particular project. And we are working with both Willamette Lane and City of Eugene. I've met with them, and there's some potential projects where we can collaborate on with this.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. My turn. I really don't trust the money will be spent effectively to make a notable difference. That's not my quote. That's directly from the verbatim responses from opponents. And that's what we're up against. You know, you have a bevy of quotes from people who are opposed to it. And it includes start using the money you have more efficiently. And we already pay too much taxes. We have answers to all of these questions. Really, if we have those answers prepared before the questions come out of the gate, then it's going to give us a great deal more chance of success, because the City of Eugene continually passes park levies. Willamette Lane continually passes park levies. How do they do it? Well, they create a picture in people's minds of what the parks do for them. And you know, in speaking with you, Brett, in the past, and when I spoke with Bob Kiefer out at Orchard Point extensively, you know, creating that picture in people's minds of what it is that it means to them, creating a salience, you know, that they can taste it, they can feel it, they can smell it. And I think that's what we're up against as we move forward toward the July 19th date of approval, and beyond that to November. So you say we're hiring a messaging consultant soon. That's a very integral part of what we do. And, you know, you have a lot of people who are ready to get on the streets with words to say. You need to get out ahead, you know, and make certain that people are thinking about the parks as what they are, and not as $30 and not as $35 or whatever it may be, or 1.6. You know, it's not numbers, it's feelings, it's taste, it's smells, it's activities. And even though people rate recreational activities low on the survey, it's not really low in people's minds. I mean, it's number one in people's minds. What are you going to do this weekend? What are you doing this weekend? Let me ask you. Well, you're thinking about it. I know that. And it's recreational activities, and Lane County parks are a part of it. As we move forward, I think a lot of the responses that we've gotten, Mr. Metz, sometimes we know that people confuse different government agencies' services. And when people sometimes say the bad things about the parks, I hear them talking about Eugene parks or city parks as opposed to county parks. So differentiating between the two is important, making sure that people understand that they're getting a rural feel, that get out of the city for our parks. So, there's a great deal of time between now and when we actually begin promoting this, promoting people's understanding of the parks. And I wanted to talk to Mr. Metz ever so briefly. You provided us with the entire survey instrument. Thank you. That's a pretty wonderful instrument that you used. I've got a hat full of compliments for you regarding the instrument, and a hat full of compliments regarding the way you cross-tabulated and some of the information that you gave to us. But one thing I thought was particularly cool is everybody knows what a push poll is. You say what's good and would you vote for this if you knew that it was good? Well, you also said what's bad. How would you vote if the bad? You don't see that all the time. That's a wonderful addition. And I will say that a lot of the local polling companies do use outside people to actually conduct the survey, to conduct the instrument. So you said that that FM3 has a Beaverton office. Is that right? Did I hear that?
No, that's
No, I'm
based on
sorry.
Gould.
Okay,
I did the
very
facility
good.
condition assessments.
So I'm not as concerned. I think I looked at the survey instrument. I think it's one of the best that I've seen. So very well done. Very well done. I'm very pleased with that personally. And I'm looking forward to July 19th, further discussion. A lot more to be said and done between now and then. Let's see what happens when you hire the what did we call it? We call it a messaging consultant. And let's move forward. So what you need from us today then is a kind of a nod toward what you're hoping for, a nod toward option A, which is a operation and maintenance. It's a $6 million over 5 years, and the list of what it's for, including operations and maintenance of 3.1 down the list. So how should we do that, Mr. Mulcahy? Should you just get a head nod on that? Do we have we actually do have, pardon me.
Yeah, and Chair, we're not looking for direction today, but we will be back on July 19th. I think if you're in agreement with that, knowing that I think, if you have a different direction you'd like us to head, we want to hear that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, the plan is to bring you, I believe it would come in the form of a board order.
Yes, it would.
Do you want to just talk through kind of the specific next steps? I need a slide there, Brett, that talked about
Yeah.
July 19th board action.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Just simply, we just want you to take a look at the funding package as it's assembled now.
Mhm.
Not just the levy, but also the $1 million for special projects that we'd be using the existing TRT and CRT to fund. And provide us, your thoughts about, how the money would be distributed and allocated, the categories. And, we want to be able to incorporate that back in to the next time when we come back on the 19th of July. And that's when we would officially ask you guys through a board order to put the local option levy on the ballot.
Excellent. Then, did you say you have a slide on that, or?
I think there was a slide that said
That was-
next steps, but
Next steps, got it.
essentially said what I just said.
Very, very good. Then, we take turns wielding the gavel up here. Right now, it's my turn, so I get to talk first. I'm in support of option A, and I hope that the entire board helps me and head nods in that direction. So, to the board for discussion. I'm seeing head nods. Commissioner Berney, option A looks like thumbs up. It looks like we're a go on that with the Commissioner Bozovich excused absent. So, anything else that you need from us regarding this?
No, nothing else, sir.
Other than enthusiasm.
Thank you for giving me the time, and Commissioner Buck, I will get you that information. You want the actual survey results and compare that to the slides you saw today.
Yeah, the same slides that Mr. Metz presented to us today.
Perfect.
And the survey itself, the instrument is actually contained in the package that we have today. So anybody watching at home can click on view agenda item, and the entire instrument is in there today. So very good. Well, I'm pleased with the progress so far. And Commissioner Berney talked about Willamette Lane. I talked about Eugene parks. People love parks, man. Let's just make sure they love Lane County parks too.
Absolutely. And I think we have an opportunity to really hammer home the message that we provide, affordable, close to home recreation opportunities. And, we were hearing a lot about water quality and how important that is to the public through the polling. And I think, the fact that we have so many parks that are associated with water, as I mentioned, the 33 boating facilities that we currently have, we definitely need to showcase that.
Well, tonight at about 7 o'clock, I'll park at Richardson Marina, walk around the marina, across the bridge, down all the way to the end where the boat dock is, walk out to the end of the dock and walk back. And that's a typical evening for us. And if you've not done it, anybody watching, anybody listening, do it, man, because our parks are fantastic.
Yeah, go out there on the sunset. It's beautiful.
Oh, boy, I'll tell you what.
Chair?
I actually have a slideshow. Do you want me to cue that? Very good. Thank you.
Chair, may I?
Commissioner Burney, please.
Thank you. Brett, I just want to go out of my way. I'm always Mr. Critical to punch holes in things, but I would like to tell you that I'm really impressed with the way you've prioritized this, the process you've gone through, the fact that you've incorporated, certain environmental things to bring back as many bird species as possible, the way you're looking at the location of the parks and proposing putting in electric charging stations. I think it's all very far-sighted, and I just want to commend you on that. Thank you, Chair.
And, Commissioner Burney, I'm going to add something that Commissioner Trieger talked about, and that's the interpretive stations at the different parks.
All of that, yeah.
All of this makes the parks more vibrant, more attractive. So thank you very much, Mr. Metz. Thank you so much for all the work you did to get us to this point, and let's move forward. Thank you. So, Mr. Mokrasky, as we reset here, we're moving along to Health and Human Services, and we'll begin with the Order 22-0621-14 in the matter of making sole source determination for selection of 2 Health and Human Services Division projects and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the determinations. And today, I'm sorry, somebody. Oh, I just hear people walk. Thought I heard somebody say chair. Yes. Mr. Mokrasky, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel, and I'd like to welcome Director Gray and Ms. Budd. And prior to that, I'd like to recognize Commissioner Buck.
Thank you so much. This item involves St. Vincent de Paul. I am related to the executive director of St. Vincent de Paul, so I'm going to declare a conflict of interest, and I will step to the side. Thank you.
Thank you for that declaration, Commissioner Buck. And we will continue. You still have a quorum of the board before you for the discussion, although no decisions will be made. Actually, I take that back. A decision will be made. You still have a quorum of the board present. So, Mr. Mokrasky, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Director Gray and Ms. Budd.
Thank you, Chair. We have 5 items before we get to the discussion around winter and inclement weather response strategies for people experiencing unsheltered houselessness. So these matters will be rather quick. They're contract approvals, but I'm just going to turn it over to our Director of Health and Human Services, Ms. Gray, to walk through the next several items before we get to that discussion.
Okay, thank you. So the first item here is fairly routine, just a sole source determination due to only a single applicant for our RFPs when they came out. This is St. Vincent de Paul has had these contracts for a number of years now, so we are renewing those. Any questions?
I have a question just procedurally. We have a number of board orders before us. Can we group the ones that Commissioner Buck is recused for, and then if there is a division between them?
I think this is the only one that she would be recused.
So C is not then.
Or let me just double check here. I don't believe St. Vincent de Paul is in the other set. I think the only reason that is a separate order is because there are some new contracts.
Very good. Then please, Director, continue.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this particular item?
I see none. So we have before us Order 22-0621-14. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I better second that.
I could, but that would be bad form. Then we have moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Burney, Order 22-0621-14, etc. Discussion to the motion. I see none. I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0 with Commissioner Bozievich excused absent and Commissioner Buck recused. We'll move along to item 11B then, which is 22-06-2115, in the matter of authorizing the allocation of American Resource Plan Act, ARPA, funds for youth suicide prevention. And back to you, Director Bray.
Thank you. And I will introduce Dr. Maxwell, who is presenting on this topic.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you, Dr. Maxwell.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks so much for having us back. Good afternoon. And Judy's going to run the slides for me. So this is about the allocation of the ARPA funds. And this is revisiting an issue that we've brought before you in the past, responding to suicide deaths among youth and adolescents in Lane County. Next slide, please. And just further, this is a request for ARPA funding, and this just goes back to the cluster that I've already talked to you about. Next slide. And so just as a brief reminder, over the last 6 months, we've had 13 youth and adolescent deaths that have impacted Lane County, and these meet the definition of a suicide point cluster. We enacted incident command. I am the commander, and then I have some staff serving. Roger Brubaker has been in front of you, and then we have a couple other staff serving, and then we're partnering with behavioral health. And then we've also really nicely gotten some state support from OHA in the form of their Suicide Rapid Response Program. Next slide, please. And so just a brief overview of what we've been doing. And so, most of these have been in some way attached to schools. And so we've been facilitating and helping to provide on-site and telebehavioral health support for youth and staff at the directly impacted schools first, and then kind of dealing with the schools that branch out. Lots of them are connected in different ways. We've also facilitated some community conversations on suicide prevention, grief, self-harm, and substance use and resilience. We have provided what we call a CISM, the Critical Incident Stress Management for school staff. These incidents have been pretty hard on staff and teachers, and so we're trying to be cognizant of that and help provide support for that. We're also helping the schools with their universal screening and safety planning for suicide risk, and the schools are at various stages, but all, expressing interest, and the state is also helping us with that. And then we have done a lot of lethal means restriction device distribution. We have had to create special storage in Charlton to store all of it. Some of it, the long gun cases are really bulky, and they only store one at a time. And so we have given out quite a bit, and that has been, the state has provided us the support. They've provided all of those resources, and I believe we are just about out. I think we have a waiting list now, and we have also distributed other resources and information, and then worked with Jason Davis for media engagement. And I noticed on the news this morning when I was watching it, there's still a crawler on one of the news that lists the National Suicide Hotline. So I think they are still trying to keep it at the forefront, which is great. Next slide, please. And that brings us to why we're here today. And so this is a request for $165,000 from ARPA funds. And so part of this we propose to use for materials purchase. And so that's kind of what I was just talking about. This increases physical safety and community preparation for potential increased mental health and suicide risk during the pandemic recovery, but also just during this suicide cluster that we're experiencing. And so we've already been doing this. We have distributed cable locks, medication lock boxes, handgun lock boxes, and the long gun cases. And so the state is able to support us through July, but then that support will go away. And so if we want to keep doing that, and there does seem to be quite a demand, the community events that we've hosted have been just a steady flow of, parents and different interested community members who are definitely taking us up on those. So we could use more. And then training materials for trainings that we already provide, but we would be able to provide more if we have more support, and that's QPR and ASSIST. And those are QPRs just for the general public, and those are on our website. People can sign up for those. ASSIST is aimed more at behavioral health providers, but still, sometimes we get just regular community members who go through that training as well. And then we are proposing an FTE of a half-time community health analyst to work with our team they would work on the research and development of a lesson plan for youth suicide intervention. This would be at our schools. The cost of that is about $65,000. And right now, there's not really a training that exists. What we want to do is train teachers and counselors and parents to be able to talk to kids about what they, this oftentimes, kids hear things. And so we want to train kids. What should they do if they have a concern about a peer? And so, it's a training, but and I guess there's no canned training that we can, QPR exists, ASSIST already exists, but apparently there is not one. And so we would be creating this. We've got some relationships with the U of O. And so we feel like we could partner with the U of O and be able to implement. We would, try to pilot this next year, implement, evaluate, and then hopefully, roll it out. If it seems to be successful, roll it out across the county as much as possible. So that, next slide. That's kind of and those are just some resources which you all have seen before. And next slide. And I am happy to answer questions. And Dr. Warren is also here, and she might be able to assist with questions as well.
Thank you, Dr. Maxwell.
And I can just add, I want to call out that it's, of course, not just the school staff that we've been providing support to who have been impacted. Our team has been very impacted by this suicide cluster as well. So Dr. Maxwell and Roger Brubaker, and to get some additional support, I think would be very meaningful to help spread the load. Even since we presented to the board, we have had several more youth suicides in our county. So this is an ongoing concern and one that's taking its toll throughout the entire community.
Thank you. Then I'm going to turn it over to the board for questions. But first, a quick question. Can you tell me the age range for this purpose of adolescents and youth? What is the age range?
I believe it goes up to 22. So I think that we see, I don't want to put a bottom age on it because I don't know but I would imagine it's like 12 to 22 is I think what state law says that we respond to.
Thank you, Dr. Maxwell. Then questions from the board, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this. One comment and then one question. My comment is, I'm really glad that you followed up, Director Gray, with that comment that it's not just the immediately impacted families or the school staff. These, we're a tight-knit community, and these are felt. These ripples expand out and are felt. And anyone who's lost someone to suicide in their immediate circle is affected when an issue is highlighted in the community. So really appreciate that. I also appreciate that we asked when the presentation was made several weeks back, what can we do? And so now you're bringing something very concrete back, and I'm excited to be able to do something about it. My question is the 0.5 FTE community health analyst, is this funds that would cover someone that's already on staff? Is this going to be a new half-time position we'll advertise for? A new full-time position, half of their hours go to this project? What's that look like?
This would be brand new. Yeah, I don't have anybody that I can reassign. So this would be a brand new half-time position.
And we are at this point looking at one-time funding. So letting this individual know that it is, it's one time, but we will of course continue to seek any additional funds for ongoing resources as we can identify those.
And so follow up, I guess I'm asking, did we back into a half-time position because we thought that's what we could figure out the funding for? Or is this really a half-time position's worth of work?
Dr. Maxwell, your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that we thought it was a reasonable amount of funding. Yeah, could we use a full-time position? Of course. I mean, there's definitely work to be done. I don't think I ever have a time where people are sitting around and don't have anything to do. It's usually the opposite. So if someone above me would want to make a decision that wants to give us a full-time position, then we definitely have the work that can do it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further questions from the board? Commissioner Burney.
I'll be voting yes on this, but I just wanted to ask Ms. Gray, help me here. I'm remembering a bit about the presentation you made about adolescent suicides. And I remember one of the conclusions we came to was young people are the first to know. And what about empowering and paying young people in some of these techniques? And I remember, Ms. Gray, if I'm not mistaken, you said, well, I have answers to that, or I have solutions, or I have thoughts, and I'll be glad to bring them back. Is that what we're seeing here, or are we seeing something different than new ideas?
So my understanding is that part of this, the job for this half FTE individual will be working with youth to help educate them in that capacity. Now, in terms of other youth initiatives, I guess I don't recall the specifics of that.
Okay. Okay. Well, if you don't recall and I don't recall, end of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berney. Further discussion, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I hope that we can identify additional funding because I really feel strongly that we could utilize somebody full-time that's doing this ongoing in our community. I know that there's been a cluster, but this does happen every year. And it's really important to the mental health of our youth. I think about my child in school and what if she was the first to know about a friend that was contemplating suicide? What if she was? And I had no idea and didn't have a counselor to go to. I wish there were more counselors in school, first off, so that this is something that kids would naturally gravitate to, but we don't have them like we once did. And this is kind of a small short-term solution that we're trying to put together here at the county level. I of course will support this, but I'm really hoping we can find something in the future to keep this work moving.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. I see no further discussion. So we have before us 22062115. And this is allocating $165,000 from the ARP to the youth suicide prevention program. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger, seconded by Commissioner Berney. We have order 220621-15. Discussion to the motion. Commissioner Berney.
I'd like staff to correct me if I'm wrong, but I see youth suicide as the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we're seeing social isolation. We're seeing young people not, a lot of alienation at that level. Am I seeing this incorrectly, or do you see it the same way?
Oh, absolutely, Commissioner Berney. You're correct there that youth and adolescent mental health and honestly, behavioral health all throughout our community has suffered throughout the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic. So we are investing in behavioral health in other ways. Our stabilization center that we are working on will serve youth. That is very important. But access to youth resources for behavioral health is really a need in our community. We have very, very limited services all across the spectrum.
Thank you. That's all, Chair.
Thank you. Then with that, I see no further discussion. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich excused absent. Thank you very much for that presentation. And we'll move along directly to item C, which is order 220621-16 in the matter of approving 4 contracts and 4 amendments, delegating authority to the county administrator to sign for approved actions. And once again, Director Gray, I'll turn it over to you.
So this is, again, mostly a fairly routine item, and I'm happy to answer any questions on any of these particular contracts. I believe there is one in here that is new, so that placed it on the regular agenda.
I'll look to the board for questions. I am seeing none, so I'll ask for a motion.
Moved.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck, and that is Order 220621-16. And a reminder to anyone watching at home, if you click on View Materials, see the entire packet that the board is considering in making this, in voting on this motion. A discussion to the motion. I see none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich absent excused, and we'll move along to item D, which is Order 22-0621-17 in the matter of approving one amendment delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved actions. And I'll recognize Commissioner Buck.
Thank you very much. Again, this item involves St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County, and I will make the same declaration that I did before. I am related to the executive director, and so I will recuse myself from this particular item.
I am sorry that I forgot that this one got stuck in the middle. You were so right, Chair Farr.
I didn't know I was right.
Congratulations.
Nor would anyone else had Ms. Gray not pointed it out.
And thank you, Commissioner Buck, for that declaration. Then we have before us 22-0621-17. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Bernay. I'll call discussion to the motion. I see none. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0 with Commissioner Buck recused and Commissioner Bozievich excused absent. And as D recuses, is that the correct term? We'll move along to item E, which is Order 22-0621-18 in the matter of delegating authority to the county administrator to sign a lease for a community health center clinic. Yay! In South Lane County, accepting funding from various community partners for renovation from the clinic and approving the name of the clinic as Community Health Centers of Lane County, South Lane Clinic. Did I just tip my hand? Director Gray, I'll turn it to you.
We are very excited to be bringing this item before the board. And I'm also excited to introduce to you Suzanne Roloff, who is our Chief Operating Officer for the Community Health Centers. And she will be responsible for bringing this clinic to life and bringing the services to our South Lane community. So wanted her to be here to meet you for this particular presentation. I think that of course the board is familiar with this item, but for anyone who's watching who is new, this will be our 7th Community Health Centers clinic, a portion of our federally qualified health center with Lane County. It will be our first rural clinic. So we are very excited to have our first clinic outside of the Eugene Springfield area and is in one of the most medically underserved areas of our state. So bringing primary care, integrated behavioral health services. We will have WIC services through public health at this clinic. And we are seeking some additional funding that we are very hopeful is going to come through soon for a full dental clinic at this facility also, which is dental services are desperately needed all over, but especially in this community. What we understand is that the one clinic in Cottage Grove that accepts OHP for dental services does not even always have a provider. So the wait lists can be a year or more. And of course, there are individuals who are suffering from conditions that cannot wait that long. That leads to a very high ER utilization rate in Cottage Grove for dental pain. So all of this is very exciting, and we're so happy to be here today, taking these next concrete steps forward.
Excellent. Well, I'm very excited too, as I probably let you know. So I'll turn it over to the board for discussion and questions. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I'm thrilled that we are at this moment. It's taken a lot of effort. And I know this began back when Faye Stewart was in my position as commissioner. There has been so many hours from community volunteers on this particular project. I want to thank them and recognize them. This is the fruits of their labor, bringing a real clinic that can serve this particular population. And we know when many people down there just don't go to a doctor at all because the drive is too far, it's too inconvenient. or they just simply don't have health insurance and therefore can't find, somebody to serve them. So I'm thrilled that this is happening. I look forward to you being able to sign the lease with a new LCC person in charge, and can't wait to meet her as well. But this is just a long time coming. I couldn't be more thrilled.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much.
Followed by Commissioner Burney.
And welcome. I just want to note, if there's anything you need from us, I'm guessing you've got it in hand. It's mostly an operational thing around getting the dental services covered. But it's just important, I think, to note that those really are not ancillary to healthcare. Dental care is healthcare, just like we're talking about behavioral health being healthcare. I didn't know until several years ago when I worked on a campaign long ago around fluoridation. I learned a lot more about dental health, not just about fluoridation, and how much periodontal disease and things that show up in a dental exam are indicative of systemic health issues, and that for a lot of folks, taking care of their dental health then prevents much more serious further disease in other parts of the body. So I think the more we can do to bring those services on board and stop separating out, the human body and mind are all one thing and needs to be tended to. So anything we can do to help ensure dental services become part of what's offered there, I would be fully supportive of. And thank you so much. And congratulations on getting to this point. It's very exciting.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Burney.
I wanted to provide a non-commissioner remark here. My wife taught at Cottage Grove High School for 30 years, and she wanted me to express her and the education community's delight that this is occurring, because I believe it or not, this in fact will make their job easier when so many of their students now are not receiving healthcare services.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney, and pass thanks along to Maddie. Thank you. Wow, here we are. I'm not going to say any more that I've not said over the course of the last 5 years. It's like a Mary Shelley novel. You take all these pieces and finally attach the probes and it's going to come to life. I love it. So with that, I will ask the motion.
I don't know how the chair is going to
vote. Commissioner Buck.
I'll move order 22-06-21-18 as presented.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Burney. We have order 22-06-21-18. I will ask for discussion to the motion. I see none. We'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Loud one. Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich, excused absence. Thank you so much. Wow.
Thank you.
I did have a question before you leave, and I'm sorry I didn't ask this during the discussion. Do you have an estimate as to how many primary care patients there will be at this clinic?
Patients, I don't know. We're looking for 4 primary care clinicians.
Okay, good. Well, we'll look for those numbers. I'm sure you'll fill their hours very, very quickly. Superb. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Morkowski.
Thank you.
At which point we'll move along to the last regular item on today's agenda, which is a discussion on winter and inclement weather 22-03 response strategies for people experiencing unsheltered houselessness. And Ms. Smokreisky, in one moment, I'm going to ask you to introduce your panel. But prior to that, I'm going to go back to a slide from a previous presentation today. It's a slide that asked, I'm going to read you a list of things that some people say may be problems facing Lane County. The top of that list, the absolute top of that list with 96% of the people saying it's extreme or very serious problem, that is homelessness. So with that, Ms. Morkowski, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just note that it is the first day of summer, as we mentioned this morning, and this in the our evolving discussions and strategies and planning around this work. Really pleased that we're having this conversation literally on the first day of summer, because I can tell you in years past it's happened oftentimes at the last day of fall or the first day of winter that we are scurrying at the last minute to identify the needs of our unhoused and unsheltered community during winter months. So this is an appropriate time to be having this conversation. want to welcome Kate Budd, who's been patiently sitting here, our program manager in the Human Services Division, overseeing our poverty and homelessness services. Kate how long have you been here now?
7 months.
7 months.
No way.
It's actually
No way.
incredible.
7 months.
Because I was going to say a couple of years, start at the beginning of the pandemic, but it gives you an idea of the impact that Kate has had in the short time that she has been here, the expertise she's brought to this work. And this is a new position that Kate is filling. And so we're just so thankful that to have this position and to have Kate in the position, and to welcome Maria Cortez, our program services coordinator. So I'm going to turn it over, unless if you have anything to add, to Kate and to Maria to walk through the presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to get my presentation up on the screen for you all.
I can share a bit regarding Maria's work. She's been with us for, she's a month ahead of me. So I think she's going on 8 months and has done an extraordinary job overseeing our efforts around the emergency shelters as well as alternative shelters, and comes to us with extraordinary experience working in emergency shelters, both here in Lane County as well as down in Orange County. So we're really pleased to have her and her wealth of knowledge.
Thank you, Kate. Joining us today, we should also have virtually Patience Winningham, the emergency manager, who is filling in for Sarai Johnson today, who had another issue that she had to take care of, is not able to join us. So we are going to touch on severe weather strategies overall. We're going to talk about some of the strategies from past years, and also look at more of a year-round approach. So looking at the All Hazards Task Force and some of the work that they have done, as well as looking forward to needs for the future and strategies, and how we can look at more of a robust approach to dealing with severe weather emergencies. So in this past winter, we had a number of strategies and approaches to dealing with the cold weather season and the events that took place as a result. So one of the strategies that we employed was a distribution of cold weather survival supplies. And in order to do that, the first thing that we did was work with and reached out to our community-based organizations to get an assessment of what the need was and what the interest was in terms of receiving supplies and getting supplies out to those who most need them in the unhoused and unsheltered community. And we had an overwhelmingly positive response with 21 community-based organizations that requested supplies, and ultimately distributed 24,803 of these supplies. So one of the strategies we used to kind of cut out the middleman was we actually had these supplies shipped directly to the community-based organizations, rather than having them sort of brought to a centralized location and then distributed out. So the idea there was to kind of save time and just have overall a more efficient approach. So some of the challenges that we saw, we were expecting to have more supply chain issues given all of the concerns with pandemic. However, we didn't see too many issues with supply chain. We did have some issues with the funding source. So out of the cold funds are the funding source that we used to purchase these supplies. And unfortunately, this fund did not become available to us until late fall. And so once we made that supply purchase, we weren't able to get a lot of those supplies until well into winter and into late December. But overall, we did get the supplies, and the supplies were distributed out to the community. One of the things that we did in the meantime to fill the gap, because we did have the snow event during the holidays that was, just came on strong, and some of the departments and organizations that are part of the All Hazards Task Force were able to work together and coordinate. So HSD was able to pull together staff and resources with out of the cold funds to go out and actually just make purchases here in the local community, at Bi-Mart and Walmart, and just purchasing supplies. We were able to coordinate with the COAD here in Lane County, which is the Community Organizations Active in Disaster, to get those supplies moved and transported in that snow out to outreach organizations who then directly distributed those immediately to the people who needed them the most. So overall, there was a positive response from community-based organizations in regard to the supplies and getting these supplies out to the folks who needed them. But improvements for the future, we could certainly look at finding a way to get supplies sooner so that we're not having that lag time during the winter and having to do more of this urgent sort of push to get these items. And then just overall better coordination of efforts amongst outreach providers and ensuring that supplies are being evenly distributed. So looking at the overall response here in Eugene and Springfield, the focus is on Egan warming centers that are very important in our community. And, despite continued challenges with the pandemic, Egan was able to serve 738 unsheltered individuals over this last winter season, which is nearly double that of the previous year. And it's also important to recognize that although the number increased this year, we're still not back to pre-pandemic numbers. And so there are still significant challenges with a reduced number of volunteers and also a reduced number of sites available for the warming centers to stand up. So this last winter season, I would say, was really a all hands on deck effort. There were a lot of, there were sort of the typical volunteers that would volunteer for Egan, but we also saw organizations stepping up, local nonprofits like Carry It Forward and the Lane County COAD, who sent volunteers out to help with safety and security around their sites, as well as Square One Villages, helping with transportation and shuttling folks to Egan sites. And even our very own Patience Winningham emergency manager was out there volunteering as well. I just wanted to make note of that. So looking at overall activations for warming sites, I have here data just for two. So the Egan Warming Centers and the Cottage Grove Community Sharing Program Winter Warming Pallets. There are other rural communities that operate warming centers I'll touch on. I don't have data for them today because they are unfortunately not connected with our HMIS database. However, I will just note that there is a big difference in the number of activations, as you can see. The reason for the difference in the number of activations has to do with activation thresholds. So the Egan Warming Centers activate at 29.9 degrees and below, and the Cottage Grove Community Sharing Program activates at 32 degrees and below. So one of the reasons that Egan does not activate at a higher threshold is because of the strain that it would put. As you can see, the additional nights of activation that would need volunteers, would need that manpower, that staff power to operate. And so it is thought that that would put even more significant strain on Egan to continue to, or to operate at that level when currently their volunteer and sites are already strained. Community sharing this past year, I will just point out that they did an awesome job activating, but they were also very strained in terms of staffing. There were certainly a lot of folks who were, pulling multiple shifts and losing out on a lot of sleep to ensure that there was that operation. I will just also point out, and I should just go back to the last slide really quick. Other rural communities that are operating warming centers include Veneta, which operates at 32 degrees and below through the Fern Ridge Community Services Program. There is also Oak Ridge through the Community Solutions Program. They operate as they're able. They don't necessarily have a threshold. And then there's the Florence Emergency Cold Weather Shelter that is community operated, and their threshold is 40 degrees and below. And they also utilize pallet shelters for their program. So another key investment and strategy that's been employed in this last couple of years and during the pandemic is pallet shelters. So a couple of years back, Lane County purchased 120 of these, and they've continued to be operated here in Lane County through this last year and are continuing to be operated now. There are 39 pallet shelters that are only being used for cold weather emergencies. So those would be in Cottage Grove and in Florence, but the rest are being operated year round. This year, we purchased an additional 64 pallet shelters, and those have been distributed across Lane County at multiple sites. And so they're supporting the City of Eugene Safe Sleep Sites, as well as the Springfield Pallet Program, which is operated by Mainstream Housing, and also the Cottage Grove Pallet Program, which is in process of expansion. So overall, I would say that pallet shelters have been, there's been a positive response to pallet shelters. They are a safe alternative to congregate shelter. They provide sturdy shelter. They also have the potential for climate control with both a heating option and option for air conditioning. So more of that inclement throughout the year potential for shelter. And with that, I will turn it over to Patience, who is going to talk more about the All Hazards Task Force and more of a year-round perspective on sheltering.
Thanks, Maria. I don't know if I'm running the slides or if you are.
I think I am. So I am
going to back up a few.
Back up there.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Farr and Commissioners. Thanks for having us present on this great topic. The weather's about to change for the better to some degree. It's going to get a little bit warmer, and we continue to focus on our ability to stand up shelters for inclement weather and determine thresholds and triggers on when do we need to open shelters. As you know, we do already have a cooling center plan written and in place. It's available on the county website under emergency management and emergency preparedness. The National Weather Service released pretty recently a briefing that delineates a matrix of temperatures and when to lean forward on sheltering or when we could anticipate experience impact of life safety issues and needing to stand up shelters. And that's available on their website. I'll be happy to share that in the notes. So again, this is something that came to me in December of last year, and really looking at catastrophic planning for sheltering and mass care, but also how do we plan for inclement weather and bad days. And Maria and Kate were pretty new. And so I told them I was going to keep planning for mass shelter and mass care for the inclement weather piece, but at some point I'd like to transition that back over to HSD and HHS so that they could take advantage of some of the stakeholders partnerships that they've already got in place through the work that they do, the great work that they do, and be able to connect those dots much more easily. But for first and foremost, it's really getting all of the key players together and having a conversation of how can we meet each other's needs. One of the things that I quickly identified were all these community organizations doing the work, the good work that they all do, but in silos. And the relationship there was to bring them all together and better understand how we can work from a more coordinated, collaborative approach in standing up shelters. And Maria told on me and said I actually did go out and volunteer because I don't know what I can't see. I think I've said that to the board a few times, that I can guess on what it is they need, but I also have to go out there and see where they're the strongest and where they're the weakest and how I can support them in connecting those dots. And that's something that I've really been spending a lot of time on first in the winter. Now we'll transition into the summer and what those inclement weather look like. So next slide. Yes. She's got a trigger finger there. Oh, there.
Oh, one. Okay, is it this one?
I think it's one more up. Yep. So,
sorry.
So last year we had the opportunity to open or activate that cooling center coordination plan that I spoke of, and that's really in response to the heat dome last summer. And that heat dome really set down over Lane County. Whether or not that's the first time or the last time, the jury's still out. The summer is only beginning here in Lane County, so we shall see. But that shelter for 3 days at the fairgrounds had some advantages for us because there wasn't anything going on at the fairgrounds at the time. So we did have a place or a facility to put those folks. And then we were also able to leverage some of the Red Cross staff, as well as some businesses and the food bank were able to donate water and other supplies to support that cooling center and that cooling shelter. Through the process of developing a plan with our community partners, we were able to support 61 people throughout the day, and 10 stayed for the entire day. And it's important to note that included people that were housed and unhoused seeking respite. The community centers are generally open during the day, and we look towards those public facilities for folks to seek respite from those heat elements, but sometimes those centers are not open, such as on a Sunday or during COVID. So it provided an opportunity for us to really look at it from other options and other opportunities. And that meant more dispersed sheltering capabilities, working with our partners, such as our churches or our community centers that are already open and have staff, and getting them training and resources so that they could potentially be a cooling center. And what does that mean to get promoted or get up on the list so that we can share that information far and wide of where folks can go to seek cooling or warming centers during the day. Next slide. So again, this is something here that I brought up in our plan, and these are the objectives specifically set forth by the task force early on when we pulled everybody together. What do we need to focus on first? Our first order of business was to determine and establish thresholds and justifications for opening inclement weather, and that work is complete and included in our plan. So it kind of provides a roadmap of the when and the why. And then the next one was to determine and establish tiered approaches for levels of activation. So when is it just the community-led effort, and when does the city or the county, cities or counties need to step in and support? That work is ongoing. Some of the help with the National Weather Service matrix will clearly help paint that picture and align some more of those pieces that we're missing. If it's 32 degrees or if it's 29 degrees and over extended period of time, those are some of the things that we really need to flesh out as a community and better understand where those fit together. And the next one is to determine and identify representatives from the community. So we do have a fairly robust list. I was looking at it this morning. We have about 30 community partners that are registered in a system that we call Basecamp. And Basecamp is a project management tool, but it's a mass notification tool through we can put messages out there and people can get alerted on their phone that says, hey, we need water at the fairgrounds, or hey, we need additional volunteers over here. And it goes out to those 30 partners. And if one of them has that resource, they can chime in right then and there. That was an easy build, or a step in the right direction of, we can't do this alone and we have to work together to support each other. And I think many of those community partners are completely grateful for being able to connect those dots of, oh, you need some cots, or you need water, or you need X. Well, here's how you ask for those things, and we're sure to get those needs met. And then the last bullet there was align and integrate all stakeholders in emergency support function 6, or mass care, for advanced planning purposes. So how can we, first we've built this ground level of, it's hot outside, it's cold outside, but then how can we build it up from there to be in a better place for catastrophic purposes, right? What about a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, and we're housing a large number of people? That's important to me, and I think it's really important to our community-based organizations and our other community partners. We just completed our Cascadia Rising exercise last Wednesday, and we had a pretty strong presence of mass care representatives from Lane County, and I think we are continuing to move in the right direction. I think Maria would contest to this, and we got lots of great feedback, and so the next step would be to pull the mass care partners together in this fall, hopefully in September, October, and have all of them really dust off that plan, get some more training and resource needs in place, and help us move forward on that one. Next slide. So this is a part of our plan. I'm pretty sure the board has seen the plan, but this shows the activation process. So if the weather is looking bad, then that we activate the task force. If we get to a declaration, then what does mobilization, monitoring, and deactivation look like? I think that this is the slide that Sarai put in here, and I think that's what she was getting at, but if she had some keynotes that I'm not privy to those. So this is clearly the delineation between the steps of how do we get there from here. Next slide. This is an org chart that's outlined in the plan, and it really shows how an all-hazard sheltering task force could meet the needs of each other in a bad day. So really putting the structure to it, using the incident command system. You'll see here at the top, it's the all-hazard sheltering task force and connected to mass care, and the sheltering operations connected to logistics coordination, so food, supplies, and staff. So the volunteer coordinator, and this would expand into an EOC activation. If we were to open an emergency operations center, they would have direct connection to that logistics section to be able to get their needs met. This is something that comes back to a Red Cross training that we hosted. I think it was in February, and we had a large number of county staff as well as community-based organizations attend that training, and that culminated into an exercise of sheltering at the fairgrounds, I believe in early June or late May. And I think that also was well attended, and we were able to glean a few lessons learned and areas of improvement, because we're always planning and improving. Next slide. So again, this is that matrix I was talking about, the year-round weather for emergencies, the activation thresholds. And we'll take a look at this every year and just make sure that it makes sense and it's aligning with the National Weather Service and their reports, and when they would tell us what levels we're at, so we can make educated decisions at the local level in coordination with our public health and human service partners. And it's all hazard. So freezing weather, snow, rain, heat, smoke, and air quality is another huge one. How do we get folks indoors for cleaner air facilities? Next slide. It's a good thing I didn't memorize these. So year-round strategies, we do have that Code Blue plan, and the Code Blue plan walks through these variables here, the activation thresholds, identifies those day use facilities. We do have a large, robust list of facilities to be considering when we're talking about Code Blue and activations. Shelter planning, again, participating in the Red Cross shelter planning, participating in the Egan Warming Center and how they do sheltering, so that we can be informed on how do we Lane County stand up shelters with the appropriate volunteer and provisioning if required. There are other counties in the state of Oregon that do stand up shelters in emergencies when there are no volunteers or other resources to meet those needs. So building that cache of resources up with our local partners will only further us in strength in mass care. Next slide. So Code Blue, we did not make that by ourselves. It's all about it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about sharing the wheel. And our partners, they build plans, and we're able to utilize those to find our way forward. It's a good foundation. So Code Blue is something that was created by our partners in Washington County, and we've taken advantage of that system. Red Cross has also taken advantage of that and used it to develop more of a more robust plan here in Lane County. There are still existing challenges with this approach for the unhoused population, but from my perspective, we're continuing to work on sheltering planning for inclement weather and catastrophic planning. Next slide. I think this is you, Maria.
Yes, thank you, Patience. I'll just jump back in here and talk a little bit. I apologize for my hoarse voice. Talk a little bit about resource allocation and the funds that we have available to use specifically for weather-related sheltering. And so the winter shelter investment out of the cold funds, or WSI-OOTC, is a state funding source. Last fiscal year, we were allocated $1.1 million, and we have been allocated an additional $1.1 million for the upcoming 2022-2023 fiscal year. The intent of this funding source is to support the sheltering needs of unhoused Oregonians by providing infrastructure, operation, and services support for emergency shelters and the supportive services directly related to them. And so last year, we focused funding kind of in 3 different areas using out of the cold funds. So one of the areas is what I touched on earlier with the supply distribution and getting those out to the unhoused and unsheltered folks in the community who needed them and were not able to access shelter. Another approach that we took was focusing on maintaining our existing shelter supply. So one of what we see in Lane County is many of our sheltering programs are funded with one-time funding. And so we're often having to sort of braid together or piece together funding resources to ensure that our current shelter supply stays afloat. So Dusk to Dawn and the Annex are a couple of examples of programs that serve a large number of people, but our funding can be somewhat unstable. And so we're having to look at filling those gaps with out of the cold funds. And then the other piece was supporting the safe sleep sites of the city of Eugene. So we helped to kind of get those programs up and running in partnership with City of Eugene, and provided funding for infrastructure for their 410 Garfield site. So that is a warehouse structure where we were able to help get the heating and the electrical work taken care of so that they can keep that building heated for all of the people that they're serving. And they are serving a large number of people, as well as the tent structures that are within that building as well, which help kind of with that separation of space and keeping folks a little bit safer in regard to the pandemic as well. So that's kind of where funding was allocated last year. And then looking forward, we can really look at how out of the cold funds could be used in regard to this more all hazards lens and the year round. The PowerPoint has got a mind of its own. But this more year round severe weather outlook. So when looking at the current state of shelter in Lane County and what we aim to do to provide shelter and resources to build a more coordinated and robust response to severe weather events, there's a number of resources that are still needed. So there is an opportunity to look at how we can further support existing shelter programs so that we can build capacity and really help build agility in these programs so that when we do have a severe weather event, we can respond better to those in those situations and accommodate additional people. Other areas to look at supporting are the current severe weather programs. So we have a number of warming programs in Lane County. And so really looking at how we can grow those in capacity so that they can take on additional unhoused individuals and look at having further activations from a year-round approach. So, one of the things that we would need to do in order to, well, there's three things really that are key that would help support current severe weather programs. So one would be ensuring that there's adequate staffing and volunteers to ensure safety for these programs. The other piece would be ensuring that the staff and volunteers are trained in crisis de-escalation and also really trained in assisting individuals who have experienced complex trauma. So it's really important when working with the unhoused population to recognize that these are that this is a sensitive group and that that makes it a little bit more challenging and looking at kind of a more of a Red Cross model where we're sort of standing up shelter in the event of a disaster, sort of a last minute thing. It makes it a little bit more challenging if you're not equipped to sort of and equipped in that training to deal with that those sensitive needs. Another key need is a permanent location in downtown Eugene for warming. Well, I would say warming center, but also something that could be used potentially throughout the year as we're looking at supporting more of an all hazards approach. And really couldn't stress this enough because currently there's no reliable space to accommodate the number of individuals who are needing shelter. And the Lane Event Center has been used historically and has been a great location. It is really ideal for setting up shelter. However, that building obviously has programming throughout the year and especially during the winter season. And so it's not a reliable option. We could look to the city of Springfield, who has invested $500,000 in renovating the Ebert Memorial Methodist Church. And they are fixing the sprinkler system and bringing it up to code so that they can accommodate a fairly large number of individuals as a permanent site for Egan. That site won't be available this upcoming winter season, but the church is signing a contract with the city to enable them to operate there for 10 years. So having a reliable site for severe weather activations would allow for a better planned response. It would increase efficiency and effectiveness of severe weather shelter programming and less of a last minute urgent need request. So when an adequate site is not identified during an activation, it means fewer people are served and more individuals are exposed to life-threatening weather. So not having a permanent site also makes getting to sites confusing for the general public because it's often called out the same day where that site will be. And so that is confusing for the folks who are referring individuals to these programs, but also confusing for the individuals who need to access these programs. And so having a permanent site would take care of that. And with that being said, I will open it up to questions. We have Kate here available for questions, myself and Patience.
Goodness, what a rich presentation. So much to talk about, so much to reflect on as we look at history. I'll open it to questions from the Board of Commissioners, and I'll begin looking at Commissioner Bernie, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. You know, you don't even need to wait for me to raise my hand to see if I have anything to say about this topic. Thank you. A lot of notes. I'm trying to organize them. First, I have just a straight up, hopefully simple, straightforward question. A few weeks ago, we authorized that the pallet shelters we had purchased be sold to the organizations that are currently posting them, just to streamline. Was that inclusive or exclusive of the 60 some that are for weather response?
So inclusive, the goal was to essentially give the pallet shelters to programs that would continue to operate them and use them, whether that be not community-based organizations or government entities.
So we are moving towards not keeping an inventory of pallet shelters as Lane County government. Okay, great. My other question, this might be a patient's question, I'm not sure, is it's interesting to, it's always been the challenge, right? Is the capacity of Egan doesn't meet what we know the need is. And so we sort of reverse engineer an activation threshold based on the available capacity rather than what we know the real need is. So is there a tracking done of if our activation threshold were X, here's how many activations would be needed if it were, and then what it actually was? So basically a gap analysis, because when I look at the number of nights some of the rural communities were able to activate because they have fewer people to serve, it just makes me wonder how over year are we understanding what that gap is?
That might be a question best posed to Maria and her staff. I know that the data is collected by Egan Warming Center specifically for their sheltering capacity, but I don't know how it's done across Lane County. There are many partners that are doing sheltering in inclement weather, but I don't know if we at the county level are collecting all of that data and then looking at the gaps of our ability to shelter those folks seeking respite. I think that we can see it when people present to the Egan Warming Centers and they're turning folks away. I've heard that from some of those that do stand-up shelters, and it's heartbreaking to them to have to turn people away because they're at capacity or full. And so they do turn around and come to me when they get to that situation. It's in their best interest to know that that's going to happen before we get there. Over the course of multiple days or multiple operational periods or activations, if you will, that's when they really start to see the attrition of volunteers and capacity, and that's when they're really pushed to their full potential of can they sustain. And that's when I come in and what I'm privy to, but I think I'll have to ask Maria if she's up to speed on the other data collection.
Yeah, because I guess what I'm asking is I know there isn't a hypothermia threshold, and yet we know that's real. It's not just a temperature, it's a combination of wet and cold, and it can be a lot warmer, but if it's also wet than just a temperature threshold, we would have a very different picture of what the need for activation is.
Yeah.
I can share that it's been offered to me that if we were to go up to a threshold of 32 degrees, that the number of times we need to be open, and I believe this is anecdotal simply, would be another 50% of the overall amount of nights that we were open during the winter. And that the concern just simply is that there isn't a capacity of volunteers who would be able to, stay up night after night to be able to offer, severe weather sheltering throughout the winter. But I appreciate your suggestion. This would be my first winter, so it's something I'd be interested in taking a closer look at.
And regarding the heat dome specifically, I really appreciated, Patience, how you said you don't know what the problem is if you don't go see it yourself. I went down to the fairgrounds when we were offering that as a cooling center during that heat dome. And there was a lot of observations I made. One of the other reasons the fairgrounds was a good site for that was we also had facility to shelter some animals, because people, as we know, will not leave their animals behind, nor should we expect them to. However, those facilities were barely adequate in terms of the comfort of the animals themselves, let alone the folks from Green Hill and other agencies staffing it. But also I observed a woman came for respite. She showed up in the right place at the event center with a dog and was told, your dog has to go to the livestock building. So she had to walk all the way across that paved, exposed parking lot. It was 111 degrees to leave her dog and then walk all the way back. And she had been out in the elements clearly for quite some time. So even when we sort of have something set up, it's not always adequate, I'll just say. I don't think I could have made that walk back and forth across that parking lot like that in those conditions. And I had come directly from my climate controlled home. I think this also leads me to wonder, the relatively small number of people we saw there, we kind of scrambled to put it together. I'm really glad we did for the folks who were able to use it, but how we got the word out about it, I think was part of why it wasn't as well utilized. So what the plan is moving forward, even if we were to have a permanent site, but certainly unless and until we do, what the activation and communications plan is for the resources that are out there and available. And not only how we get that word out to those of us with constituents and to our community partner organizations, but just to individuals in the community, because there was a lot of mutual aid, spontaneous mutual aid happening during the heat dome in particular. People just took it upon themselves to go to the grocery store, get a few cases of water, and just drove around handing water bottles out. People really wanted to help, or handing out KN95 masks during the smoke event, just to people that they saw evidently out in the elements. So how we are going to communicate activation and resources that we make available on these really quick turnarounds.
Absolutely. And I think that that's, what's great about the All Hazards Task Force, really providing, a platform to talk through exactly what you're referring to with the activations and how that communication flow will happen. And so I think those are things that we are talking about, and I'm excited to see that move forward.
And of course, we will leverage our internal communications, public information officers in order to help us with that. And I think part of what happened last year, for those of us who are locals to the Northwest, we were looking at our phones going, no way, that's going to change. Right? Because we just hadn't seen it before. And I think that it's unlikely that we would have that response in the future. So we might have an opportunity to go a little farther ahead of it. And that would be not only from a communication standpoint, but also in people seeking the information, because we know that now that it truly is possible. It did happen.
Great, thank you. Then I guess I would just conclude by requesting whatever works best for staff, but some way of incorporating updates, since we now have these regular updates about services to unhoused, unsheltered folks, maybe the progress on both the communications plan for hazardous weather response, as well as just what these triggers are for activation, and just all these pieces of this conversation, rather than waiting for a timeline to make its own item and get it on our agenda. If we can just incorporate this, because it really is just the influence of the climate conditions really informs the work on our work with unhoused folks. So if we could just start incorporating some of these pieces into those updates, that would be an efficient way to keep us in the loop. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further discussion, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of specific questions, but at first I just want to appreciate that we're moving from what we used to call winter strategies to all weather strategies. You know, Mother Nature has made it perfectly clear to us that we need to discuss this issue year round, not just one time a year like we previously did. So in this case, it sounds like there's a team that is working on this continuously, and there's still more refinement. You can correct me if that's not the case, but there's still ongoing refinement to our plans as we experience these events over time more often, which I certainly think will happen. They come with very little notice usually, right? We have maybe a couple of days in advance, 2, 3, 4 if we're lucky in advance, knowing when weather changes will swing in a way that will activate one of these strategies. So for this, I find that we really have to be well planned out in advance as to where people are going to go, and what we have to do to coordinate the event in and of itself, knowing that volunteers and staff are all going to be affected by the same event as well, and preparing their own families and their own homes. And so there may not be as many people available to help in these circumstances. You had mentioned before that we have been able to use the fairgrounds in the past, primarily because it was COVID and they weren't being used for other things. Well, we're hopefully working ourselves out of COVID, and those buildings at the fairgrounds are going to be filled with activities. And what if this happens in the middle of a home and garden show? Even if we pause entrance to an activity because of an extreme event, there still could be a lot of stuff in the facilities, and it may be unusable. And so where will we house people is my question. Where we don't have, just a building that's sitting empty for this purpose. That doesn't seem practical either, because this doesn't happen all year round. And we would want to otherwise do business in a facility on the other days of the year. So I'm concerned that we don't have known listed places that we will go should X, Y, Z various event occur well in advance. I would really like to see that part fleshed out, and how many people it can accommodate at different locations, and then you're able to choose the one that best fits the event that's going to occur. And that's really been the toughest part, I think, in the past, is being able to identify that, because they rely a lot on volunteers. And we know that the volunteer pool, it has dwindled quite a bit over the years. And I hope it comes back, but it may not come back all at once. It may take several years for us to beef that up again. And so what I would just really like to see more specific locations that we can identify, size, or amount of people each one can accommodate, partnerships with, those groups that can accommodate it, considering, if we have to pay staff to be there because there aren't enough volunteers, what does that cost, and where are we going to pay for it from? We had at one time considered a partnership with schools, because also it was COVID and there was no kids in the school, and that didn't come to fruition. We had actually had a good discussion with 4J administration about what was possible and what they could and couldn't accommodate. They had big gyms, but they needed bathrooms in a certain location. Only a certain amount of those buildings had those bathrooms in a certain location that would accommodate it. But kids are back in school, and they do activities during the summer. So that's not always going to be a viable issue. And then lastly, I'll just state that our rural communities go through the exact same thing that we're doing here in the metro centers, and they have no one near the staff or capacity that we do here. Cottage Grove has been doing wonderful work in order to accommodate, but they're one of the bigger, smaller cities that we have, them in Florence, really. And so how do we accommodate reaching out proactively through this strategy format to those smaller communities and making sure that we care for them and help assist them in effectively doing these strategies in their own location?
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Berney.
Thank you, Chair. This whole discussion breaks my heart. I'm listening to it, and it feels like we're really dealing with scarcity, right, to solve this issue. I mean, the market isn't providing housing at affordable rates. What I'm hearing is there's a scarcity of locations, and even if there wasn't, there's a scarcity of volunteers. I don't know if it's possible, but what I haven't heard is what's the vision of what success would look like here. Let me posit just a thought, and it's worth the air I'm using to breathe it out. I personally believe that we could develop a pilot and attract dollars for it that identified the criteria for all weather sites, all weather, right? Smoke events, heat events, cold events. I don't know what other hell events, but there's going to be other events. If I was, and Mary, forgive me, I don't see your full name, so it's not lack of respect, but when I went to high school in Orange County, the biggest weather event in the 60s was when they let us out of high school to feed the smudge pots that were heating the orange groves when there was a frost. That was it. That was climate change back then. So it seems to me that if we can identify the characteristics and criteria for these all-weather shelters, and we looked and we became more community-based, not centrally, because in these events, really, it's community. So whether it's VFW posts, Grange halls, every school district identifying a gym or cafeteria or some facility, church basements, but identify community-based, and then identify the dollars, and we'll get them if we're aggressive from the Infrastructure Act, to retrofit these isolated spots, right? Maybe not for a cascade event, but we certainly can climate control them and make them energy efficient. And in fact, as my company did in the past, make them store 60 days worth of energy, so that food lockers can be kept cold and bathrooms can flush and refrigerators can be kept on. It would seem to me that that's an alternative to what I've heard from the state and what I hear from us that's consistent with a vision of plenty, right? A vision of actually having those relationships in place. I personally, and I have no data to back this up, but I personally believe that there are enough dollars out there to offset costs of retrofitting with host locations that would be interested, that it might be worth pursuing. But other than that, the situation just breaks my heart, and I would love to be able to make a quantitative impact in it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Berney.
Chair Farr, if I
Please.
may, just Commissioner Berney, I think the point you made is points you made were all very good, and I've heard across the board a real interest in building some longer term strategies. I think that we do have an opportunity with public health now receiving some money around climate change. And it's not about preventing climate change. It's about helping our communities live with climate change. And we are hiring some staff in that area. I really think that it's a good opportunity for us to partner across divisions and across departments in the county to help with some of this longer term planning and preparation, because extreme weather as we know, is a part of what we can expect in the future, in the winter and in the summer. So I think that there are some nice crossovers there and maybe some opportunities for funding in that area as well.
Well, if I may, Chair.
Please.
This is probably one area I actually could be a resource in if you would like. And if you wouldn't like, trust me, I don't want to be the helping hand that strikes again. But my previous business did develop such a center, the largest one in the country to date, believe it or not, still, which became the primary evacuation, one of the two primary evacuation sites for County of Los Angeles officials, because it stored 60 days worth of energy, all clean, by the way, and did exactly what I was suggesting we could do at much smaller community-based sites. So, I mean, if there's any appetite by staff to look into how to structure something like that, I would love the opportunity to be a resource.
Very much.
And thank you for that, Commissioner Berney. You know, years ago, we weren't talking about winter strategies or all hazard strategies. We were just barely trying to figure out where to put homeless people who were on the street homeless, kids who were on the street homeless. That was as recently as 10 years ago. We were beginning to address winter strategies in September, October of that year. And we're beginning to talk about it and beginning to think about how can we find places to put people this winter. Now, the climate has been changing. It has been colder in the winters here. And so the number of people on the streets has increased significantly. So the sea has changed, but nonetheless, what is encouraging is that we're at a point right now where we have a board of county commissioners who are enthusiastically talking about detailed solutions that can happen across the board. And we're at a place right now that we've never been before. We certainly weren't here in my 10th year as a city councilor, where I'm looking at an article written about the homeless task force. And we didn't even talk about winter strategies. We're just talking about tent cities at that point in time. So we're way beyond that point, to the point where we can begin to address things on a detailed level, such as Commissioner Berney was just saying, a community-wide effort when it really does become an absolute all-out emergency to house people. And I'll equate it as something that I noticed when I came to the United States in 1965. Every place I went in the little town of Tillamook, there were these signs with 3 triangles on them, and an arrow pointing to below to the fallout shelter. And every place had a fallout shelter. I didn't know what this meant. So I found out that it was a place where food was stored, water was stored to prevent, in the event of a Soviet nuclear strike on Portland, or whatever it was. But, the Cape Creek Tunnel, for instance, was a fallout shelter. The basement of J.C. Penney's was a fallout shelter. Every place was bearing some of the load of sheltering people in the case of what was then the Cold War all-out emergency that we're considering. Well, we're there, but it's not a fallout shelter that we're looking for. It's a shelter for men and women and children who are going to suffer and perish in whether it be heat, cold, smoke, whatever it may be. How can we get all people on board in not unlike the fashion that all people are on board with the fallout shelter? J.C. Penney had one. The 88-cent store in downtown Tillamook had a fallout shelter that would maybe house 10 or 20 people. But, that kind of an effort, I think, is what Commissioner Berney is talking about. A broad community-based effort where everybody gets behind it. But we're at a point right now, I do believe, where we can move forward with it. And one thing I'll state, Mr. Mokrajewski, is that a little over a year ago, a little less than a year ago, actually, the Poverty and Homelessness Board asked me to bring to you a recommendation for a all-hazard task force. You jumped on it. You and staff jumped on it immediately. And it's not just in Human Services now. It's in our Office of Emergency Management. It is an emergency, and we're looking at it across the board, all hands on deck for this. And commissioners, I think that's what we're talking about right now, is all hands on deck to come up with solutions for this year, because we may need something in 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. We may not need anything at all this year, but being prepared for it, I think that's what you're hearing us talk about. Ms. Cortez, thank you. What a brilliant presentation. Look at the stimulation of conversation that you've that you've engaged us in. It's not the end. This is not an end presentation. This is a beginning of the work we're doing. You've been here 8 months. You've been here 7 months. Look how much has happened in just those 8 and 7 months. It's amazing. Ms. Mulcahy, thank you very much. Anything else for the order of this agenda item? Director Gray?
No, nothing else.
To the Board of Commissioners? Then,
Chair.
yes, please.
Take a page from your book with the rhetorical questions. I appreciate you saying we need solutions, plural. Maybe it would help if at our Lane Event Center, we had some sort of mass sheltering facility that was available to us to respond in case of certain emergencies and had bathrooms and shaded areas and storage where we could have supplies and a place for our staff to set up an incident command in the event of a community-wide emergency. Maybe it could be sort of centered around a stadium, but ultimately and essentially be a emergency response center at our fairgrounds. Just an idea.
That works for Eugene.
It's centrally located and yeah. That's why I say solutions plural. It would be one important piece of that puzzle.
So it's once again, all hands on deck, and we talk about building new facilities. We just opened this DD center. So when we plan new facilities, whatever the facility may be, how do we incorporate this emergency need into it, whether it be a stadium at the fairgrounds or someplace else? Whether it be an indoor track facility in Springfield or someplace else, or whether it be a parole and probation in Bethel. How do we make it a part of what we do? Just build an emergency response into our development for the future. What a great discussion. Anything further for this item?
Chair.
Yes, please, Commissioner Burney.
If I may, I think this topic and this issue is the topic and the issue to once again recreate true community-wide mobilization. So I really don't want to lose the spirit of this. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Well, and to kind of whip that a little bit, the legislative will whip that a little bit. It's more than just a response to an emergency. It really is an opportunity to get the entire community together, and it's economic boost. It's a boost for the people who need shelters, a boost for people who need jobs. Everybody can benefit from this. And it's pretty exciting that we're all talking about it. You have this group of people surrounding you, Director Gray, in order to move us forward in this. So, Ms. Mulcahy, thank you very much. And bravo, not the last discussion, because it's we have a full summer ahead of us and lots of work to do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Board.
Thank you.
Wow. Are we done? Then, Mr. Mulcahy, we are finished with our regular business for the day, and I'll move along with let's see. Get to the correct place in today's agenda. There we are. Commissioner's business, Ms. Mulcahy. Announcements from commissioners. Commissioner Buck.
I'll just announce that there's another event upriver that I'd like to invite people to. The McKinsey Chamber has been working for years on getting a community sign. So when you go upriver, you'll know that you're entering the McKinsey River District. And it will be this Thursday at 11 a.m. And because there's lack of parking directly on the highway, people are invited to go to Hendricks Park Bridge, and that is one of our newly developed park areas out up on the McKinsey, and park there and walk up to where the sign is going to be placed. And it's pretty exciting opportunity, and also another sign of hope and economic development upriver.
Pretty exciting. Hendricks Bridge Wayside is the first bridge over the McKinsey just before you get to Walterville, I believe.
Right.
The fire station is across the road. So lots of parking there, and that is on my calendar. So I'm hoping to be there. Further announcements from the board. I am seeing none. Then we'll move along, Ms. Mulcahy, to future board assignment requests. And I warned you there was at least one that you had.
Yes.
Oh, no, wait, we're on the request, not the recite.
Right, yeah.
So, I'm sorry. Any further requests for future board assignments? I'm seeing none, Ms. Mulcahy. We'll move along to a review of assignments.
So
I had 10. I wanted to load them up.
Let's speak quickly. So the one assignment was Commissioner Bernie's motion and the subsequent vote, 4-0 vote, to produce a board order option 2 related to the voters pamphlet. So that'll be an assignment, and we'll bring back the board order to document the board's desire to have a voters pamphlet for primary elections, primary May elections.
An odd number of years.
In odd number of years, thank you.
Yeah. And that's it?
That's the only one.
Just one assignment for Ms. Mokrasky. Come on, we can do better than that. Because Ms. Mokrasky, the next thing I'm going to say is our next board meeting is in fact July 12th. So we have 2 down weeks ahead of us, and we'll meet in Harris Hall for our next board meeting, a hybrid once again on July 12th at 9 a.m. In the meantime, any emergency business may take place, and the board has authorized you to work with the leadership of the board on a couple of different items if anything comes up over the course of the next 2 weeks. With that, to the board, I believe there's nothing further for the order of today's agenda. I'm wielding a gavel. It's going to come down very hard, and I'll see you all on July 12th.
Bye-bye. Thank you.